Zara pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the abandoned cargo bay, her breathing shallow and labored. The purple bruises across her pale blue skin told the story of her recent beating, better than words ever could. At 347 years old, she was considered ancient by Kalari standards, well past the age when her people expected her to fade quietly into the background of society. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the corridor outside. Her own kind, the very people she had served faithfully for over 2 centuries, were hunting her like a diseased animal. The Kalari Council had made their decision clear. She was too old, too slow, and too much of a burden on their resources. The traditional final journey awaited her, a ceremony that was really just a polite way of saying execution. Zara's forearms trembled as she clutched a small datapad containing the only evidence of the corruption she had discovered within the council chambers. For months, she had watched as younger Kalari received contracts and opportunities while qualified elders were systematically removed from positions of importance. When she tried to speak out, they labeled her as mentally deteriorating due to age. The irony wasn't lost on her that she could still outthink most of the council members. Her mind sharp as ever despite her aging body. Her silver hair might have lost its luster and her movements might be slower, but her intelligence remained intact. Unfortunately, her society valued physical prowess and youth above wisdom and experience. A sudden crash made her flinch. They were getting closer, probably using thermal scanners to track her body heat. The cargo bay offered little in terms of hiding spots. Just empty containers and scattered debris from whatever ship had been stored here before the station was abandoned. She thought about her daughter, Kess, who had turned her back on her own mother when the council began their persecution. The younger generation of Kalari had been taught that the elderly were nothing but dead weight, consuming resources that could better serve the strong and productive. Even family bonds couldn't survive such systematic brainwashing. Footsteps grew louder. Zara closed her eyes and prepared for the inevitable. She had run as far as her aging legs could carry her, and now she would face whatever punishment the council deemed appropriate for her crimes of growing old and speaking truth to power. The cargo bay door hissed open with a mechanical wheeze. 3 Kalari enforcement officers stepped through, their weapons drawn and their faces showing nothing but cold determination. Behind them walked Council Member Thrix, a middle-aged Kalari, whose ambition had helped orchestrate the systematic removal of the elderly from their society. "There you are, old one," Thrix said with a sneer. "Did you really think you could hide from us forever? Your time has come to accept your fate with dignity." Zara stood slowly, her joints protesting the movement. "Dignity?" she spat. "There is no dignity in what you're doing. You're destroying everything our ancestors built, everything that made the Kalari great." "Our ancestors were weak," one of the officers replied. "They let sentiment cloud their judgment. We've evolved beyond such foolishness." The lead officer raised his weapon, a plasma rifle that would ensure a quick death. Zara straightened her spine and lifted her chin, determined to meet her end without showing fear. If this was to be her final moment, she would face it as the proud Kalari she had always been. But before the officer could fire, an explosion rocked the station. Emergency lights began flashing red, and an automated voice announced a hull breach in Section 7. The officers looked around in confusion as the station shuddered under some kind of impact. Through the chaos, Zara heard something impossible, the sound of human voices echoing through the corridors. Humans were supposed to be a myth, stories told to frighten children about the barbaric species that lived in the Outer Rim territories. Yet here they were, apparently real and apparently causing quite a commotion on the station. "What's happening?" Thrix demanded, speaking into his communication device. "Report." The response was filled with static and panic. "Unknown ship, humans. They're demanding, can't understand their intentions." As if summoned by the mention of their species, the cargo bay door exploded inward. Through the smoke and debris stepped 3 figures unlike anything Zara had ever seen. They were bipedal like the Kalari, but shorter and more compact, with strange pale skin and hair growing from the tops of their heads. Their clothing was practical rather than ornate, and they moved with a fluid confidence that spoke of extensive combat experience. The lead human looked around the room, taking in the scene with sharp green eyes. When his gaze fell on Zara, then shifted to the weapons pointed at her, his expression hardened into something that made even the Kalari officers take a step back. Well, the human said in surprisingly clear Kalari common tongue. Looks like we interrupted something important. The Kalari officers immediately turned their weapons toward the humans, but something in the way the three strangers moved made them hesitate. The humans didn't seem concerned about being outnumbered or outgunned. If anything, they appeared almost bored by the situation. "Stay back, humans," Thrix commanded, his voice carrying the authority he was accustomed to wielding. "This is Kalari business. You have no place here." The lead human, a man with graying hair at his temples and scars across his weathered face, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "Marcus Chen," he said, introducing himself with casual politeness. "And you're wrong about us not having business here. See, we got a distress signal from this station. Someone was broadcasting information about systematic elimination of elderly citizens." Zara's eyes widened in surprise. She had managed to send out her data before they found her. But she never expected anyone to respond, especially not humans. The message had been a desperate act, broadcasted on all frequencies with the slim hope that someone somewhere might care about justice. That signal was illegal and unauthorized, Thrix snapped. "The old one has mental degradation. Her claims are the ramblings of a diseased mind." The human named Marcus looked at Zara with genuine interest rather than dismissal. His eyes took in her injuries, her defensive posture, and the data pad she still clutched in her lower right arm. "She looks pretty sharp to me," he said. "Sharp enough to slice through whatever lies you've been telling yourselves." The second human, a woman with short dark hair and arms that looked like they could bend steel, stepped forward. "Captain," she said to Marcus, "thermal scans show more Kalari heading this way. Looks like they're surrounding the bay." "Copy that, Rodriguez," Marcus replied without taking his eyes off the Kalari officers. "Williams, you getting all this?" The third human, younger than the others with bright blue eyes and quick movements, held up a small device. "Every word, sir. Broadcasting live to the Galactic Ethics Committee and about 40 different news networks." Thrix went pale at this revelation. The Kalari had worked hard to keep their new social policies hidden from the galactic community. Most species still believed them to be the wise, elder-respecting civilization they had once been. "You can't do this," Thrix protested. "This is internal Kalari governance. Other species have no right to interfere." Marcus laughed, a sound that somehow managed to be both warm and threatening at the same time. "That's where you're wrong, friend. See, humans have this funny thing about standing up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Call it a character flaw." The lead Kalari officer, growing impatient with the conversation, raised his weapon toward Marcus. "Enough talk. You will leave now or face the consequences." What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but Zara would remember it for the rest of her life. The human moved with impossible speed, ducking under the plasma bolt while simultaneously drawing a weapon from his hip. 2 more shots rang out from his companions, and suddenly all 3 Kalari officers were on the ground, their weapons scattered across the floor. Thrix stood frozen in shock, staring at his fallen guards. "Impossible," he whispered. "They were trained warriors. How could primitive?" Rodriguez asked with amusement. "Buddy, we've been fighting wars since before your species figured out agriculture. We've had a lot of practice." Marcus holstered his weapon and approached Zara slowly, his hands visible and non-threatening. "Ma'am," he said respectfully, "I'm Captain Marcus Chen of the human vessel Defiance. We received your transmission about the treatment of elderly Kalari citizens. Would you be willing to share your evidence with the galactic community?" Zara looked into his eyes and saw something she hadn't seen from her own people in years. Genuine respect. Not pity, not dismissal, but the kind of respect one gives to an equal. "You would do this for me?" she asked. "I'm not even human. I'm just an old Kalari that nobody wants. Age brings wisdom," Marcus said simply. "Any society that throws away its wisdom is doomed to repeat its mistakes. We humans learned that lesson the hard way a long time ago." Williams looked up from his communication device. "Captain, we've got about 50 Kalari troops surrounding this section. They're demanding we surrender the fugitive." Marcus turned to Zara. "Your choice, ma'am. We can fight our way out of here and get you somewhere safe, or you can go with them and hope for the best. But I should mention, humans don't abandon people who ask for help." The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder as Kalari reinforcements closed in. Zara looked at the datapad in her hands, then at the humans who had risked their lives to answer her desperate call. For the first time in months, she felt something she had almost forgotten: hope. "I'll come with you," she said. her voice growing stronger. But first, there are others. Other elderly Kalari hidden throughout the station. If we're going to do this, we should save them all. Marcus grinned, and Zara realized that humans might just be the most dangerous allies anyone could ask for. The human ship Defiance hung in space like a predator waiting to strike. From the outside, it looked battered and worn, with patches welded over what appeared to be battle damage from countless conflicts. But appearances could be deceiving, as Zara was quickly learning about humans in general. Inside the ship's medical bay, she watched in amazement as human technology worked to heal her injuries. The medical officer, a gentlewoman named Dr. Sarah Kim, applied treatments that seemed impossibly advanced for what the galaxy considered a primitive species. "Your bone density is remarkable for your age," Dr. Kim observed as she ran a scanner over Zara's forearms. "Kalari physiology is fascinating. These stress fractures should heal completely with our calcium boosters." "You've studied Kalari biology?" Zara asked, surprised. Most species knew very little about each other's medical needs. "Humans study everyone," Dr. Kim replied with a smile. "We believe knowledge is the greatest weapon against ignorance and fear. Your people taught us much about cellular regeneration techniques, actually, back when the Kalari were still interested in sharing knowledge with younger species." The irony wasn't lost on Zara. Her own people had once been teachers and mentors to developing civilizations. Now they executed their elderly for the crime of aging. How far they had fallen from their noble origins. Captain Chen entered the medical bay, his expression serious but not unkind. "The good news is we got 17 more elderly Kalari off that station before it went into lockdown. The bad news is the Kalari Council has declared all of them mentally incompetent fugitives." "What does that mean for us?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "It means they've authorized deadly force to retrieve you all," Chen replied. "They're claiming humans kidnapped senile Kalari citizens and are holding them against their will." Dr. Kim snorted with disgust. "Against their will? Half of them were so grateful they cried when we got them to safety. That poor old fellow Krem kept thanking us in 3 different languages." Zara had met Krem briefly during their escape. At 412 years old, he was one of the oldest Kalari still alive. A former master engineer who had designed some of the most beautiful structures on the Kalari homeworld. Now his own people considered him worthless waste of resources. "Captain," came a voice over the ship's communication system. "We're getting multiple contacts on long-range sensors. Looks like the Kalari are sending a fleet to intercept us." Chen tapped his communication badge. "How many ships, Rodriguez?" 12 warships, sir. Heavy cruisers and destroyers. They mean business," Zara felt her heart sink. Even if humans were more capable than she had initially believed, 12 Kalari warships was an overwhelming force. "Captain, you should leave us behind. We're not worth starting a war over." Chen looked at her with an expression that reminded her of her grandfather. Patient, wise, and absolutely unmovable when his mind was made up. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not how humans work. We don't abandon people in need just because the odds are bad. But your ship, your crew, will do their jobs." Chen interrupted gently, just like we always have. "Williams, what's our ETA to the neutral zone?" 47 minutes at current speed, sir. But those Kalari ships will intercept us in 32 minutes. Dr. Kim finished her treatment of Zara's injuries and helped her sit up. "There's something you should know," she said quietly. "This isn't the first time we've rescued people from their own societies. Humans have a bit of a reputation for sticking our noses where they don't belong." "Why?" Zara asked. "Why do you care what happens to other species?" Chen answered before Dr. Kim could respond. "Because we remember what it was like to be alone. Centuries ago, humans nearly destroyed themselves through wars, prejudice, and fear. We learned the hard way that survival isn't just about the strongest or the youngest. It's about protecting everyone who can't protect themselves." The ship suddenly lurched to one side and warning lights began flashing. Over the intercom, Rodriguez's voice carried a note of urgency. "Captain, the Kalari fleet has opened fire." "They're not trying to disable us, they're shooting to kill." Chen's jaw tightened. "Battle stations. All elderly passengers to the secure compartments." He looked at Zara one more time. "Ma'am, I need you to understand something. We're about to fight 12 ships with one. We might not make it out of this. But we're going to try our absolute best to get you and the others to safety." Zara stood slowly, her freshly healed bones feeling stronger than they had in years. "Captain, I was a tactical officer for over a century before they forced me into retirement. If you're going into battle, you could use someone who knows Kalari ship capabilities. Dr. Kim started to protest, but Chen held up a hand. Doctor, what's her medical status? Physically, she's in better shape than some of your crew members. Mentally, she's sharp as a blade. Chen nodded thoughtfully. Ma'am, if you're volunteering, we could use the help. But I won't order you to fight your own people. Zara thought about Kess, her daughter, who had abandoned her. She thought about Thrix and the council members who had condemned her to death for the crime of aging. Then she thought about Krem and the 16 other elderly Kalari now depending on this human crew for their lives. They stopped being my people when they decided I was too old to matter, she said firmly. Let's show them what experience and wisdom can do when they're paired with human determination. The ship shuddered again as another volley of plasma bolts struck their shields. Through the medical bay's small viewport, Zara could see the distant flashes of approaching Kalari ships. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. The bridge of the Defiance was controlled chaos when Zara arrived with Captain Chen. Human crew members moved with practiced efficiency, their hands dancing across control panels while status reports flowed in steady streams. She had served on Kalari ships for decades, but she had never seen a crew work with such seamless coordination. Zara, meet my tactical officer, Lieutenant Commander Rodriguez, Chen said, gesturing to the dark-haired woman who had been with them during the rescue. Rodriguez, Zara used to be a tactical officer herself. She knows Kalari ship weaknesses. Rodriguez looked up from her weapon controls with interest rather than resentment. In Kalari society, an older officer would never have been welcomed onto a bridge during combat. What can you tell us about their formation? She asked without hesitation. Zara studied the tactical display, her experienced eyes taking in the approaching fleet's positioning. They're using a standard intimidation pattern, she said after a moment. Heavy cruisers in front to absorb damage, destroyers spread wide to prevent escape. But see how they've grouped their ships? They're assuming you'll try to fight your way through the center. What would you recommend? Chen asked, his tone respectful of her expertise. Kalari commanders are trained to follow doctrine above all else, Zara explained, her 4 hands working the display controls with muscle memory. They expect enemies to behave predictably. But humans, you don't fight like anyone else, do you? Williams, the young communications officer, looked up from his station. Captain, lead Kalari ship is hailing us. They're demanding immediate surrender of all fugitives. Put them through, Chen ordered. The main screen flickered to life, showing the bridge of a Kalari heavy cruiser. The commander was a middle-aged Kalari male with the ceremonial scars of a veteran warrior. Behind him, Zara could see Thrix standing with several other council members. Human vessel, the commander announced formally. I am Fleet Commander Nexus of the Kalari Defense Force. You are harboring criminals and fugitives from Kalari justice. Surrender them immediately or face destruction. Chen stepped forward, his posture respectful but firm. Commander Nexus, I'm Captain Marcus Chen. We're carrying asylum seekers who requested protection under Galactic Convention 77 Alpha. These individuals face persecution based solely on their age. Lies, Thrix interrupted from behind Nexus. These are senile criminals who have stolen classified information. They are mentally incompetent and dangerous. Zara felt anger surge through her, but Chen placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. When he spoke, his voice remained calm and professional. Counselor Thrix, we have recordings of your enforcement officers preparing to execute an unarmed elderly civilian. That doesn't sound like handling mentally incompetent individuals to me. Nexus looked uncomfortable, glancing back at Thrix with obvious uncertainty. Captain Chen, I have my orders. Return the fugitives or we will take them by force. Commander, Zara said, stepping into view of the communication channel. You know me. I served alongside your father during the Sector 9 conflicts. Nexus, I taught you orbital mechanics when you were a junior officer. Look at me and tell me I'm mentally incompetent. The young fleet commander's composure wavered for a moment. Zara could see recognition and confusion warring in his expression. Zara, we were told you had completely deteriorated. The report said what the council wanted them to say, Zara interrupted. They're systematically eliminating anyone old enough to remember what the Kalari used to stand for. Anyone who might question their new order. Thrix pushed forward, shoving Nexus aside. Enough of this deception. Commander, you have direct orders from the High Council. Destroy that ship and recover any survivors for proper questioning. Nexus hesitated, clearly torn between his duty and what he was seeing with his own eyes. "Counselor, if Zara is truly competent, perhaps we should reconsider. You will follow orders," Thrix shouted. "Or you'll join the other obsolete relics." The transmission cut off abruptly. On the tactical display, Zara watched the Kalari ships begin their final approach. She could see the energy signatures building as weapons charged for the killing blow. "Rodriguez," Chen said quietly. "Are our surprises ready?" "Yes, sir. All packages deployed and waiting for your signal." Zara looked between them with confusion. "Surprises?" Chen smiled with the kind of expression that had probably terrified enemies across the galaxy. "Humans don't just run away when we're outnumbered, Zara. We plan ahead." The lead Kalari cruiser opened fire, plasma bolts streaking across space toward the Defiance. But instead of trying to evade or fight back conventionally, the human ship did something unexpected. It dropped what appeared to be cargo containers directly into the path of the incoming fleet. "What are those?" Zara asked. "Mines," Williams replied cheerfully. "Really, really big mines. We've been dropping them behind us for the last 20 minutes while they chased us." The Kalari ships, committed to their attack formation, couldn't avoid the sudden obstacles. The first mine detonated against the lead destroyer, sending debris spinning through space. Seconds later, the entire minefield erupted in a chain reaction of explosions. When the light faded, 3 Kalari ships had been destroyed outright, and 4 more were heavily damaged and falling behind. The remaining 5 ships scattered their formation, exactly as Zara would have predicted. "Now they're confused and angry," she observed with professional appreciation. "Their doctrine doesn't cover this scenario." "That's the idea," Rodriguez said, her fingers dancing over the weapon controls. "Captain, the damaged ships are trying to regroup. Orders?" Chen looked at Zara. "From your experience, what would you do if you were commanding that fleet right now?" Zara studied the tactical situation with decades of experience. "I'd pull back the damaged ships and try to box you in with the remaining vessels. But I'd also be calling for reinforcements and wondering what other surprises you might have waiting." "Good analysis," Chen said. "Williams, send a message to Fleet Commander Nexus. Tell him we have 6 more minefields between here and the neutral zone, and we really don't want to use them on ships containing good Kalari officers who are just following bad orders." As the message transmitted, Zara realized she was witnessing something remarkable. The humans weren't just winning through superior firepower or technology, they were winning through creativity, compassion, and the kind of tactical thinking that came from treating every crew member's input as valuable, regardless of their age or species. The standoff continued for nearly an hour. The remaining Kalari ships maintained a cautious distance, while their commanders argued via encrypted channels. Zara could imagine the heated discussions taking place between Nexus, who clearly had doubts about his mission, and Thrix, who would be demanding immediate action regardless of casualties. During the tense waiting period, Chen invited Zara to meet the other rescued Kalari, who had been brought to one of the ship's common areas. She found 17 elderly beings huddled together, most still showing signs of the abuse they had suffered before their rescue, but their eyes held something that had been missing for months: hope. Old Krem looked up as she entered, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Zara, the humans tell us you helped plan our escape from those ships." "The humans did all the hard work," Zara replied, settling down among her people. "I just shared what I knew about Kalari tactics." "More than that," said Vess, a former medical researcher who had been forced into hiding when the council decided her research into age-related diseases was a waste of resources. "You gave us courage to hope again. When we heard your transmission, when we learned someone was finally speaking truth about what was happening to us, we thought we were alone," added Jorik, whose forearms bore the intricate scars of a master craftsman. "We thought the whole galaxy had forgotten that the elderly deserve respect." Dr. Kim appeared in the doorway, her medical scanner in hand. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need to check on everyone's condition. We're approaching the neutral zone and there may be some diplomatic meetings ahead." As she worked, Dr. Kim chatted easily with each of the Kalari elders, asking about their backgrounds and treating them with the kind of professional respect they hadn't experienced in years. Zara watched in amazement as beings who had been beaten down by their own society began to straighten their spines and speak with renewed confidence. "Doctor," Krem asked as she scanned his vital signs, "why do humans care what happens to us? We're not your people. We can't offer you anything in return." Dr. Kim paused in her work, considering the question seriously. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the old days on Earth, before we learned to value our elders properly. He said humanity nearly lost centuries of accumulated wisdom because we thought old meant useless. We learned better, but it took a lot of pain to get there. And now you help other species avoid the same mistakes? Vess asked. When we can, Dr. Kim replied. Knowledge without compassion is just clever cruelty. Humans learned that lesson at great cost. Captain Chen's voice came over the intercom, interrupting their conversation. All passengers and crew prepare for transition to neutral space. We should be crossing the boundary in approximately 10 minutes. Zara felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Safety was within reach, but she knew their troubles were far from over. The Kalari Council wouldn't simply give up, and the galactic community's response to their situation remained uncertain. As if reading her thoughts, Williams appeared in the doorway. Ma'am, Captain Chen would like you on the bridge. We're getting communications from multiple sources, and he thinks you might want to hear some of them. Back on the bridge, Zara found the communication board lighting up with incoming messages from across the galaxy. Williams patched through the first transmission, which came from the Galactic Ethics Committee. This is Chairman Valdris of the Galactic Ethics Committee. We have received and reviewed the evidence transmitted by the human vessel Defiance regarding systematic persecution of elderly Kalari citizens. An emergency session has been called to address these allegations. The next transmission was even more surprising. It came from the Kalari homeworld itself, but not from the council chambers. This is Dr. Narakalos, speaking for the underground resistance of concerned Kalari citizens. The evidence you broadcast has reached our people. Demonstrations are beginning in 7 major cities. The youth are learning what their elders have suffered, and they are not pleased with the council's actions. Chen looked at Zara with satisfaction. Seems like your message reached more people than just us. But the most shocking transmission came last. It was from Fleet Commander Nexus, transmitted on a private channel. Captain Chen, this is Nexus. I need to speak with Zara privately. What I have to say could be considered treason by the current council. Chen nodded to Zara, who stepped forward to the communication station. This is Zara, Nexus. What's troubling you? The young fleet commander appeared on the screen, his expression haggard with exhaustion and moral conflict. Zara, I've been reviewing classified reports. The systematic elimination of elderly citizens began 18 months ago with a secret council directive. But there's more. The council has been falsifying medical reports, claiming mental degradation where none exists. How many? Zara asked, though she dreaded the answer. Over 3,000 elderly Kalari have been declared mentally incompetent and processed. In the last year alone, the council told us they died of natural causes related to their age. The bridge fell silent as the implications sank in. What they had discovered wasn't just persecution, it was genocide, carried out under the cover of medical necessity and social efficiency. Nexus, Zara said carefully, are you prepared to testify to this information? The young commander took a deep breath. I have copies of the real medical reports, the actual council directives and communication logs showing the cover-up. Zara, they're planning to expand the program. Anyone over 200 years old will be subject to mandatory competency evaluations with predetermined negative results. Chen stepped into view of the communication channel. Commander, we're about to cross into neutral space. If you're serious about this, we can arrange protection for you and any evidence you're willing to share. There are others, Nexus said quietly. Other officers who have been questioning orders. Other citizens who suspect the truth. If we can prove what's really happening, then we can stop it, Zara finished. But it means turning against everything you've been taught to respect. Nexus looked directly at her through the screen. Zara, you taught me that a good officer serves the people, not the politicians. Maybe it's time I remembered that lesson. The neutral zone station of Haven Point had seen many refugees over the centuries, but nothing quite like the mixed group that disembarked from the human vessel Defiance. 17 elderly Kalari, supported by a human crew, followed by Fleet Commander Nexus and 12 other Kalari officers who had defected with crucial evidence of their government's crimes. Zara walked slowly through the station's corridors, her forearms carrying data pads containing testimonies from dozens of Kalari families whose elderly members had mysteriously disappeared. The evidence was overwhelming, but she knew that proving genocide and actually stopping it were two very different challenges. The main conference room buzzed with activity as representatives from 14 different species gathered to hear the evidence. Chairman Valdris, a tall reptilian being from the Nexus worlds, called the emergency session to order with obvious gravity. This committee has reviewed preliminary evidence suggesting systematic persecution of elderly citizens within Kalari space, he announced. We will now hear testimony from the primary witnesses. Zara took her place at the witness table, feeling the weight of centuries of experience behind her words. Across the room, she noticed several younger Kalari in the observer section, including, to her shock, her daughter Kess. State your name and background for the record, Chairman Valdris requested. I am Zara of the Kalari, formerly Senior Tactical Officer of the 5th Fleet. Currently 347 years old and classified by my government as mentally incompetent despite demonstrable evidence to the contrary. She spent the next hour detailing the systematic persecution she had witnessed, the false medical reports, and the organized elimination of elderly citizens. Her testimony was supported by Nexus, who provided classified government documents, and by Dr. Kim, who presented medical evidence disproving the Council's claims about age-related mental degradation. But the most powerful testimony came from Old Krem, who spoke about watching his neighbors disappear one by one, told they were being taken for medical evaluation and never returning. They told us we were burdens, he said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries. They said we consumed resources better used for the young and strong. But we built the civilization they now enjoy. We fought the wars that gave them peace. We developed the technologies that made them prosperous. How did service become a crime punishable by death? When the formal testimony concluded, Chairman Valdris called for a brief recess. During the break, Zara was approached by her daughter Kess, whose face showed shame and regret in equal measure. Mother, Kess said quietly, I didn't know. When you disappeared, they told us you had been taken to a care facility for treatment. I thought you were receiving help. Zara studied her daughter's face, seeing genuine anguish there. What changed your mind? The recordings, Kess replied. When the humans broadcast your evidence when we saw what was really happening. Mother, there are protests across 7 worlds. Young Kalari are demanding answers about their missing grandparents and great-grandparents. And you believe me now? Kess's forearms trembled as she reached out tentatively. I believed you then in my heart. But I was afraid. The Council made it clear that questioning their policies meant being classified as a dissenter. I was a coward and I abandoned you when you needed me most. Captain Chen appeared beside them, his expression diplomatically neutral. Ma'am, the committee is ready to reconvene. But there's something you should know. We just received word that Councillor Thrix has requested permission to address the committee. The CAS session resumed with Thrix entering the conference room flanked by 2 Kalari guards. He looked older than Zara remembered, his features drawn with stress and anger. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. Honored representatives, he began, you have been deceived by the ramblings of mentally deteriorated individuals and the propaganda of human agitators. The Kalari Council's policies regarding elderly care are both humane and necessary. Councillor Thrix, Chairman Valdris interrupted, we have documentation suggesting that over 3,000 elderly Kalari have been executed under false medical pretenses. How do you respond to these allegations? I respond that elderly minds are prone to paranoia and delusions. Thrix replied smoothly. These individuals have confused necessary medical intervention with persecution. The humans have taken advantage of their condition to spread lies about lawful government policies. Fleet Commander Nexus stood up from his seat in the witness section. Counselor, I have the actual medical reports, the ones that show perfect mental competency for most of the individuals who were eliminated. Would you like me to share Dr. Kellish's true findings with the committee? Thrix's composure cracked slightly. Commander Nexus, you are in violation of direct orders by being here. Your testimony is that of a traitor and cannot be trusted. Perhaps, Nexus replied calmly, but my evidence speaks for itself, as does this. He activated a holographic projector, filling the room with a 3-dimensional recording of a council session. In it, Thrix could be clearly seen discussing the elimination of elderly citizens as a resource management strategy, with no mention of medical necessity or mental incompetence. That recording is classified and illegally obtained, Thrix protested, but his voice had lost much of its authority. Chairman Veldris studied the holographic evidence with obvious dismay. Counselor Thrix, this appears to show government officials discussing the murder of citizens based solely on their age. Do you have any response? Thrix looked around the room, seeing condemnation in every face. Even his own guards appeared shaken by the evidence presented. The Kalari Council will not be dictated to by alien committees, he said finally. We govern our own people as we see fit. Not anymore, said a new voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a group of young Kalari entering, led by a female officer Zara didn't recognize. I am Commander Yala of the Kalari Democratic Resistance. As of this morning, the old council has been dissolved by popular uprising. We have come to formally request extradition of war criminals, beginning with Thrix. The room erupted in surprised murmurs as the implications became clear. The evidence presented to the Galactic community had sparked a revolution on the Kalari homeworld itself. 6 months later, Zara stood on the observation deck of the Kalari homeworld's new council chambers, watching ships arrive from across the galaxy. Today marked the formal establishment of the Intergalactic Elder Protection Treaty, an agreement that would prevent other species from repeating the Kalari's mistakes. The revolution had been swift but thorough. Once the evidence of systematic genocide became public, the Kalari people had risen up with shocking speed. The old council members were now awaiting trial, while a new government struggled to rebuild trust both within their society and with the Galactic community. Nervous? Asked Captain Chen, joining her at the viewing port. The human looked remarkably comfortable in formal diplomatic attire, though Zara suspected he would prefer to be back on his ship. Amazed, Zara replied honestly. 6 months ago, I was hiding in a cargo bay waiting to die. Now I'm about to address the Galactic Assembly as the Kalari's new ambassador for Elder Affairs. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. The same government that had tried to execute her for being too old now needed her experience and wisdom to help repair their damaged reputation. Commander Yala's new administration had specifically requested that Zara take the position, arguing that her credibility with both elderly Kalari and the international community made her irreplaceable. Any word from the others? Chen asked. Zara smiled, thinking of her fellow survivors. Krem had been appointed as head of the new Architectural Heritage Council, tasked with preserving the knowledge and techniques that the old government had nearly lost forever. Dr. Vess was leading a medical research team studying age-related diseases, her work now properly funded and respected. All 17 of the rescued elders had found new purposes in the reformed Kalari society. They're thriving, she said. It's remarkable how quickly people can heal when they're given hope and respect again. Through the viewing port, she could see the human ship Defiance docked at the diplomatic station. Rodriguez and Williams were visible through one of the ship's windows, apparently engaged in maintenance work. Even at a formal diplomatic function, humans remained practical and focused on their duties. Captain, she said carefully, I need to ask you something. Why did you really answer my distress call? The truth, not the diplomatic answer. Chen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes focused on the stars beyond the station. My grandmother, he said finally. She was 93 when I was born, already considered ancient by most people's standards, but she was the smartest person I ever knew. She taught me languages, history, philosophy, things I never would have learned otherwise. He paused, lost in memory. When she started showing signs of dementia, some people suggested we put her in a facility and forget about her. Said she was just a burden, taking up resources that could be better used elsewhere. But my family refused. We cared for her until the end, and even in her confused moments, she would sometimes say things that were absolutely brilliant. So when you heard my transmission, I heard my grandmother calling for help, Chen finished. And I heard every other elder who ever died alone because their society decided they were worthless. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. Kess appeared, now wearing the uniform of the Kalari Diplomatic Corps. The relationship between mother and daughter had been slowly healing over the past months, built on honest conversations about fear, courage, and the responsibilities of standing up for what's right. Mother, they're ready for your speech, Kess said. The assembly representatives are gathered, and the broadcast is going live across 47 worlds. Zara took a deep breath, feeling the weight of representing not just her own people, but elderly beings across the galaxy who might be facing similar persecution. How many species have signed the preliminary agreement? 31 so far, Kess replied. The Nexus worlds were the first, followed by the Terran Federation. Several others are still debating, but the momentum is building. They walked together, toward the assembly chamber, passing groups of beings from dozens of different species. Zara noticed how many of them were elderly individuals, beings who might once have been hidden away or ignored by their societies. Now they stood as respected delegates and advisors, their experience valued rather than dismissed. The assembly chamber fell silent as Zara approached the speaker's podium. Looking out at the gathered representatives, she saw the diversity of the galaxy, young and old, from species that had learned to value their elders and others that were still struggling with the concept. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. 6 months ago, I was considered by my own people to be a worthless relic, fit only for disposal. Today, I stand before you as proof that age does not diminish worth, that experience is not a burden, and that wisdom grows stronger with time, not weaker. She paused, meeting the eyes of delegates throughout the chamber. But I am not here merely to speak for the Kalari. I am here to speak for every being in this galaxy who has been told they are too old to matter, too slow to contribute, too experienced to be trusted with important decisions. The speech continued for 20 minutes, outlining the practical benefits of respecting elderly citizens, the moral imperatives of protecting vulnerable populations, and the legal frameworks needed to prevent future genocides. But it was her closing words that would be remembered long after the formal treaty was signed. The humans have a saying, Zara concluded, looking directly at Captain Chen in the observer section. They say that a society is judged not by how it treats its strongest members, but by how it protects its weakest. Today, we choose to be judged by our compassion rather than our efficiency, by our wisdom rather than our youth, by our commitment to justice rather than our convenience. The applause was thunderous, lasting for several minutes as delegates rose to their feet. But what moved Zara most was seeing old Krem in the audience, tears streaming down his weathered face as he realized that his life, and the lives of countless others like him, finally mattered again. Later that evening, as the celebrations continued, in the station's diplomatic quarters, Zara found herself once again on the observation deck with Captain Chen. The Defiance was preparing to depart, its mission complete but its crew ready for whatever crisis might require their intervention next. Thank you, she said simply. For everything. Chen smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. Thank you for teaching us something important. What's that? That sometimes the most important victories aren't won by the youngest or strongest fighters, he replied. Sometimes they're won by people who have lived long enough to know what's really worth fighting for. As the human ship pulled away from the station and jumped to hyperspace, Zara remained at the viewing port, watching the stars and thinking about the future. Somewhere out there, other elderly beings might be facing persecution or abandonment. But now there were laws to protect them, advocates to speak for them, and humans willing to answer their calls for help. The galaxy had become a little bit safer for those who had lived long enough to accumulate wisdom. And that, Zara thought, was a victory worth growing old for.